everyone. It's Thursday, August 3rd, just afternoon, and it is the meeting of the first Finance Committee of FY24. And we have a number of visitors here today, so I'm just going to start at my right and have you introduce yourself real quick.
Well, I'm Matt Berman of Institute of Social and Economic Research.
Kelly Lessons, treasurer.
Andy Holloman, board member, but not a finance.
Dora Wilson, board member and clerk. Diane Hirschberg, director of ICER.
Andy Ratliff, CFO.
Jared Bryant, superintendent.
Dana DeFeo, Institute of Social and Economic Research, University of Alaska, Anchorage.
You say Dan?
Dana.
Dan.
Yeah.
Katie Parrott, senior director for management and budget.
Katie.
Margot Bellamy, school board.
Mark Foster, advisory committee to the ICER.
Corey Yates, teacher, Anchorage Education Association.
Aurora Cokerland, senior director of finance.
Jenny Knudsen, Senior Director of Mental Health and Student Support.
Jacob McCauley, director of federal programs.
Welcome.
Thank you all for taking time to be here today. I really appreciate that. I wanted to spend the first 20 minutes or so with Team ICER. You guys have a lot of really important cutting-edge research and value your time and insight. And you shared some slides with Ms. Foster, and I'll let you maybe talk about the scope of your research. And I know that you have some questions for Team ASD.
Okay. I just need a second.
Sure, trying to load.
And then also, if anyone needs an agenda, they're right there.
Okay.
That's our,
The ICER study.
that's a great paper that just came out with the data that sort of preempted the work that we're doing and sharing today. So what's today is sort of hot off the press.
Here's download. It was up on there.
That's a dip. Oh, it is on the posted to the agenda. It's not this, but it is posted to the agenda in Board Docs.
Extra copies. So we've been here before to share this particular project, and what I can do is give a quick overview of it, because I know there's some new faces here, and then get into some of the preliminary quantitative findings that we have that Matt has sort of uncovered and that we find very, very curious, and we're trying to interpret. So I've introduced myself and Matt, and on the next slide, we sort of give an overview of the project. The project is called Sufficient Compensation for Retention and Equity. It's a National Science Foundation funded project, and we're actually doing a statewide study, building off some of the work that we did in the salary and tenure study, the paper that was just distributed. And we're really trying to understand, looking at the teacher or the state's ability to attract and retain educators. We're wanting to really understand the relationship between working condition and compensation in driving those teacher decisions to take a job and stay in the job long term. Since it is funded at the National Science Foundation, the particular interest is STEM educators. But we're also interested in whether or not STEM educators look very different from teachers who are in other subjects. So we're sort of, as a de facto, looking at the whole teacher workforce, which is useful to the state outside of the NSF's interest in STEM teachers in particular. And most of all, we're focused on high-need schools that are able to retain STEM educators and attract STEM educators, and what they're doing and how that what factors promote their success. So that's sort of an overview of the project. And the next slide just kind of shows our work plan. We started with quantitative analysis, which we spent a whole lot of time in the administrative processes of getting access to data, joining data sets. We also spent a lot of time compiling collective bargaining agreements for all 54 school districts in the state over the last 10 years, making sure that we were representing all of the forms of compensations the teacher gets, salary, but also benefit packages. We work with lots of great partners who we appreciate a tremendous amount. We were able to join all of these data sets, do some quantitative analysis with teacher employment records, and now we're in the process of interpreting those preliminary quantitative findings. Ultimately, we'll follow up with some qualitative case studies of some of these schools that are retaining teachers better than our models suggest they should. try and figure out what's going on there and hopefully improve our models with what we learn in the qualitative component. But right now, we're looking at these quantitative numbers, finding some interesting patterns, and that's what we're hoping to share with you today and hear your impressions. Why are we finding what we're finding? So I think in the next slide, yeah, Matt, do you want to?
Okay, well, yeah, I guess I thought you, okay, well, I'd be happy to. So our first step is to try to to develop a quantitative model to take turnover and identify what really matters. And then once you figure out sort of, it's like control for all that noise, because it creates a lot of fog you gotta get through. And then what is there about Title I, STEM teachers, Title I being that marker for high need school, and the individual schools that sort of stand out. And first, the short answer is being a STEM teacher doesn't, they look like, at least in Anchorage area, they look like other teachers. So there's not really any difference. So it works fine like with all teachers. And we look at, so what we did really throughout the quantitative analysis, if for a little bit more views, it's like a survival analysis. So those familiar with healthy teachers, like how long you survive, how long you survive the school as a teacher. It's widely used in like labor studies. So, and we're like, what matters? Well, salary matters. The obvious teacher demographics matter. The size of the school, like bigger school, which is also like the level of the school, high school bigger. And so there's sort of, you can't really tell the difference between the number of students at the school level is sort of the same. And that obviously matters. But the biggest driver is various images of poverty. So within Anchorage, all of Anchorage, in terms of the statistics, is sort of poverty, but schools have report the number of students going to free lunches and reduced lunches, and that's based on poverty. And it's really dominating the difference in the school. It's like it's swamping everything else once we control for the teacher characteristics. So I'd like to spend a little bit trying to talk a little bit more about that. So we can go to the next slide. I think. So this is the distribution. So once the school is eligible, and I asked Mark Foster, used to be retired as a budget, he was a business officer, so he knows, and you confirm that, well, if you report your free and reduced lunches, and then the school is eligible for either targeted assistance programs or a school-wide program, and then from there, there's sort of a choice as whether you targeted assistance program, you actually implement one, and if you're eligible for a school-wide program, you could have targeted assistance or a school-wide program or no program too. So there's choices, and that the choices turn out to make a big difference. And that's go to the next slide. You'll see that there's a lot of differences there. But here's the the quantitative assessment of how much of a difference it makes. And so the bars they represent sort of the excess probability that a teacher will leave. Like, how much does this add to the likelihood that a teacher will leave? So a negative effect means it actually makes them more likely to stay. And obviously, I put salary increase there to show that 10% salary increase actually, say it's like 6% longer that they'll stay there. So it does matter, but you see it's about equal in magnitude to 10% more students getting a free lunch. It's sort of the same magnitude. But the reduced price lunch is much more much more conducive to turnover. And if you look at the program, the targeted assistance category seems to be doing a good job at driving teachers away. And that's whereas the school-wide program, a school-wide school, you see is relatively a modest effect on turnover. So there's a lot more to be saying here, and you see I put some error bars on there to show the 95% confidence interval. There's really a significant difference, like it's twice as much twice as a teacher and a target assistant eligible for a target assistance program, even if it's eligible for a school library, you're like twice as likely to leave at the end of the year. So their survival is half, essentially. And that's a big deal. So that's basically, as far as I want to go, but just ask more about, well, since it's such a big deal, we need to know more about how the targeted, how the Title I programs are decided, how to negotiate, how it works, and how, what we need to find out when we go. Because this means we should be looking at schools and going in there and talking to people about this. And we need to know, what we do. So thanks. That's basically about all I have.
I'm kind of wondering which schools like represent that. So like Muldoon would be probably full reduced or full, everybody gets free or lunch. What's a targeted program? I think.
Well, I should add that it does change from year to year. It's not always the same.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It kind of rotates through. So does that have?
In 2020, I didn't mention 2020, everything, COVID, everything is sort of different. So that's sort of not counting your target.
In Anchorage School District, we're using the school-wide title plan instead of targeted, and that's been so for as long as I know.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. It didn't make sense.
Well, but there are a lot of schools that are reporting targeted assistance. So
Like those SNAPs do.
no, they're not. There are some in Nassau, but they're mostly in Anchorage. They're mainly in Anchorage. Well,
What is targeted
Yeah,
assistance?
I'm
Yeah.
confused on it.
yeah.
So there's
So,
two models that you can choose from the state level, and it's either having a school-wide program and deciding at a certain cut. I think 75 is the minimum, but we use 68%. We reduce lunch right now as our pivot point. And so every year you determine the cut line of what percentage of kids qualify for free and reduced lunch, and all of those schools become eligible as under the school-wide plan. So you can't do a mixed plan. You can't do some school-wide eligible and some targeted. I don't know enough about targeted right now, but basically the dollars would follow every student that qualifies. So every school would get a certain per pupil allocation. Some schools would get a lot and some schools would get very little, and they would still have to follow requirements and use those dollars to support resources for those specific identified students.
okay, well, thanks. Can we follow up on this after, like later on, maybe not necessarily right away, but because the data is what's reported to feed, and it may not be the same as what what you're actually doing, and that's important to know too.
Technical question, a teacher that moves from one building to another, would that be turnover, or is it just when they leave the profession?
So it's what they leave, they can move from one school to another school. And this is a school. That's different. Yeah.
To measure it both ways. Do they stay in the teaching profession in Alaska? Do they stay in the district? Do they stay in the school? So here the unit of analysis is whether they stay in the job in the school.
Yeah, when you run a survival analysis, you have to decide, okay, what's a failure? And in this case, a failure is not reporting for work in the same school in the next year.
So you could look at it in district too.
So
The district turnover is much more.
Right, so I have a question though, because being married to a teacher, it's not optional always to stay in the school. So that's one of the issues with using school-to-school turnover is it's not voluntary.
Yeah, we looked at, we tried to do what we could to determine that, and it's not always possible. There are some schools that actually closed. And then we don't count that. And, if the number of teachers in the school goes down, we are adjusting for that. And so we're trying to, but of course we can't get it all. These individual teachers have to do something.
So have you run the same, I'm sorry, It's fine, because, and I'm sorry, because we haven't talked about this internally, because I'm being a director now. Have you run the same analysis then just for staying or leaving the district and the profession for these same teachers?
No, well, yeah, we've looked at that, but that was more the focus of the study that we did.
Right.
It's very different, relatively low in the turnover hierarchy there.
Because I just know that so many teachers will get moved involuntarily because of enrollment changing, or simply to, I'm married to a science teacher. Those are in high demand, and so there are times where they'll get moved for reasons that have to do with the needs of the other school.
Yes. Well, I just say, it leads too far, but it's really important to control for experience, and tenure makes a big difference. A tenured teacher is much less likely to be controlling for that. So we're controlling for a lot of stuff that we can't control for it all.
Something that kind of jumped to mind, because I'm trying to think why lunches would make such a difference. For a lot of our Title I schools, particularly during COVID, but even in other times, they would also, if they had free lunch, they would have free breakfast in the classroom. And my guess is that made a number of teachers move. And I'll just say that as a teacher, you have a certain amount of time where you get to teach, and then you have a certain amount of time where you have to do other things. And paperwork, discipline issues, and if you're serving meals in your classroom, a lot of cleanup and hassle. I mean, it just, the lunch, like the fact that students are eating there can be okay in the general way, but it's non-teaching work that is not particularly pleasant, especially in the fact that we've reduced our custodial staff severely. Even if you're not serving any food in your classroom, it's not as clean as it used to be, unless you decide to clean it yourself. And I don't know how you could incorporate this. It would take so many one-on-one interviews, but I can see where if I was a teacher in a school that served a breakfast and a lunch in my classroom.
And a snack.
And a snack, and I could move to a school that didn't have that. And it might be in combination with the fact it's closer to my house, or I know a couple of people on staff in the place, et cetera, et cetera. But it would be one more reason I would think about moving to a different location.
From a policy perspective, thinking about the work of the wellness committee, it is better for students to have breakfast after the bell, and you could make that policy district-wide and get rid of that disincentive for teacher mobility. So we're gonna make it count for everyone, but at least kids are gonna have a chance to have breakfast.
Right.
So that's-
I'm not in any way arguing against that. Okay.
So I'm wondering if it's possible that when you serve breakfast, the students are more likely to actually show up. And absenteeism is a bit slower, and they're maybe more likely to be on time to eat as well, and whether that may be like sort of counter.
There are a lot of positives to it. I'm not saying it's a bad policy that we serve the meals in classrooms, but when teachers as individuals are making that decision, so serving meals is not what any of us went to school to learn. It just changes things. I think it's good for kids. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it by any means, but when I look at the numbers, I'm always trying to figure out what is the root behind this one bar being so big and this other bar being so small. And it could be in a case that if that is a factor, I'm just guessing, but additional staff to compensate for the fact that we're doing that in certain buildings would help. I know particularly during COVID, it was an issue for a lot of teachers that it just added a lot, and it didn't help anything with their workload or anything. It just meant more events for people to do. But yeah,
Another question, what about reduced price lunch versus free lunch?
Administration sort of share what the difference between reduce,
Yeah,
reduce and.
how does it actually work inside the school? Yeah, it is. You actually pay.
But in terms of
How do you
why-
pay? How do you pay the students? I don't remember having to bring lunch money.
They, usually parents they can, I'm not.
Most of it
speaking-
online now. but they
It's
have
all
a different
online
rate.
now. You have to go through queue. You sign in and you pay, that's how we pay. We pay for lunches online.
I would say that the information about.
Or you can send a check. You can send a check into the office.
We would know which schools do have in-classroom food versus which schools have students fed in the cafeteria. Because you know,
That may vary within a school, from teacher to teacher.
well, I mean, either you do have some in the in the classrooms or you don't. Because I'm thinking, again, as a teacher, whether or not kids are paying for the lunch or not, doesn't matter to me. Where they eat it. And I say this as someone that used to invite kids to bring their food to their classroom for lunch. But where they eat it, might have an impact. That might, it would be interesting to know if that data has changed or worse.
I would, not entirely knowing what's behind this and having more faith in the administration's ability to analyze this on my own. I would throw it out there that there's a possibility that at a school where students are receiving reduced price lunch, it's possible that there are simply fewer resources available at a school level than at a school where students are receiving a free lunch, right? And so you have teachers who are finding themselves pulled to just do more with less than at a school where maybe additional resources are being deployed and available. And the stress, I mean, your pizza here talks about sort of the hedonic compensation or maybe a penalty. And my guess is that there's a penalty at a receiving reduced price lunch that it's not there at the free school. I want to be, sorry.
I was just gonna say anecdotally, if you're at a school that doesn't have a free lunch, if you need parent volunteers, you're more likely to have people show up. You're more likely to have a EPSA that gives money on classrooms, easy to get grants to do things. There's, whether the district itself is providing those resources, there are more resources and non-reduced price lunch.
But here in the, if you think about the schools that have a real divergence of income, right? So let's talk about Rome, because it's the one I'm watching day to day. And you have very wealthy families providing a lot of resources to a very small group of students, and another group of students with parents who are barely making it. And so there's very unequal distribution of the resources available to the teachers and a very unequal distribution of what teachers have to do in order to allow, I'm gonna guess the highly gifted teachers are not buying food and giving it to their children every day. And in my family, we're buying food and giving it to children in a classroom every day.
I can talk to you about that.
Yeah. We can give you a good case study.
I hate to nip this conversation in the bud, but I wanted, because I do want to get to the other items on our agenda. I feel like this door is going to always be open, but I did want to ask a question with respect to your paper, which raised my eyebrows. It was on page 24, where it states that Matsu core schools are able to achieve highly qualified teachers by paying less than Anchorage, which would have to raise its salaries by about 13% to reach the 100% threshold. Could you speak to that a little bit more? And is that all of Anchorage, or simply thinking about some of our schools?
It's an average. So it's obviously, now that we've had more chance, recent work to look within the Anchorage School District more carefully, I can assure you that it's only some of the schools and not others. It's clearly the title of the schools that are driving that.
So,
Sue has travel on schools too, but they have different challenges.
And a
These were
lower-
data from 2015,
Right.
sort of in the decade prior, so I think we have a lot of the same trends and patterns now, but I wouldn't focus too much on the number, just the pattern.
okay,
Given the age of the data that
Right.
we use for the analysis.
is there any way to update that to,
Yeah, well, sort of.
Yeah.
We're working on that too.
okay,
But I don't even know. Yeah, I could also say that in Anchorage, like two of the schools that were actually bringing Anchorage sort of down. The schools on base that have actually closed were part of that problem. So it may not be, it's the same if you do it now.
I want to respect your time. The very last slide has my email and Matt's. Also, you can just Google us. Our names are on the here. If you go to ICER, I think there's probably a lot of follow-up questions in a lot of different directions. So what would be, we invite everybody to email us, call us, we can connect, but what would be the best way for us to move forward with this large role? We could,
well,
Invite people over.
we could invite you for an hour-long like lunch session sometime or something like that, or.
let's, we'll connect offline to figure out a next best step of staying in contact. I certainly hope that, administration will be able to help answer questions and clarify, maybe in a follow-up.
Yeah, we'd like to talk.
You're the brains behind the operation. We'll be able to give that targeted response. So, really appreciate everybody's time and your important research.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
With that, you're welcome to stay.
You're welcome to stay.
The next item on the agenda is an FY 23 budget update.
Okay, so we'll go over where we stand on our FY 23 closing out. We're still in the process of closing out FY 23, so we still do have some adjusting entries to make. So this isn't going to be a final presentation, of course. But just give you a mind's eye where we're at and then kind of go over some of the changes we've made since we actually produced the initial projection in November and kind of identify how much money we might have to carry over for future years. So the first section we're going to go through is our revenue. The biggest changes you'll see here is our interest earnings continue to grow. We're about $4 million over our initial projection, which is good. We operate on a mark-to-market approach where, we're tying to the value of our investments. And a lot of this has actually been actual interest earnings as the Fed's increased the interest rates. Our interest earnings have also increased along with that. The other one you'll see is the foundation funding under state revenue, about $22 million variance there. Most of that's due to the $16 million in one-time funding that we got after we had approved the original budget. And a lot of the rest of it is either correspondence funding or most of the rest of it's probably intensive needs funding above what we've actually projected to begin with. So that's the biggest driver in state funding discrepancy. And then federal impact aid is a little bit lower, Medicaid's a little lower, and the other ones are pretty well close, except for the Emergency Connectivity Fund, which is reimbursements for the cost of some of our hardware through IT for Chromebooks and some of our Apple lease devices. So we put that application through, we actually did receive that money and we're just reporting it there. The next page is our expenditures. Fairly well in line with what we had presented this last time, I believe, in May. The biggest ones you'll see is a lot of unspent money within teachers' assistants and certificated teachers and nurses, counselors, librarians. I guess paraprofessionals, not teacher assistants. I need to change that, sorry. And then you'll see like a overage in substitutes. That's really to cover those underages in a lot of these other funds or the other types of classification of employee. And then other benefits, our medical, of course, That's mostly due to either unfilled positions, turnover, and folks waiving medical insurance. The thing I kind of want to address here is with our attrition rates. Under the attrition in salaries and in benefits, if you add in the total variance, the 3.5 million in salaries plus that attrition, that 9.9 million, our actual attrition experience was about $13.5 million in salaries and about 26.5 million or so in benefits. So we realized about $40 million in unspent salary and benefit funds throughout the course of this year. We projected almost about 28 million, a little under 28 million for that. So this is something we're trying to watch. We increased it a little bit for the FY24 budget, our attrition estimates, but not nearly up to 40 million. So we're hoping by incentivizing some of these positions to get filled, we'll be able to bring that down. So a little hesitant to chase that number up to like a $40 million mark. Once you miss that mark, then you're going to start overspending by quite a bit. But that's something we'll watch, hopefully, well, not really hopefully, because the downside of this is we don't have the people in our building serving the students, but we do have a financial savings by not doing it. So we'll be watching that in FY24 to see if we have some money remaining. Those are the bigger variances that we've had throughout since our last projection. Our utilities are still well under budget. And indirect cost has creeped up a little bit as we're starting to spend out a lot of that Easter money and some of these other grants that we've received. But really, if you turn over to the next page, really what we want to get at is at the very bottom of this.
Sorry.
This is where we show the very bottom section of this, where we show the $30 million we referenced in the board meeting yesterday. Yesterday? No, Tuesday.
Seems like yesterday though.
So you'll see the $32 million. That's where we reduced it from almost $45 million in the one-time funding. So we're reducing the amount that we need to apply from our savings. And that leaves about $30 million that would be down to our 8% board minimum. So we'll carry that forward. Our budget for FY24 would then be balanced, and then we'll have, potentially $30 million, all things being equal, to carry into FY25 to offset that deficit. A lot of things can change, of course, with FY25. We have a lot of unsettled contracts, and we don't know what our enrollment's going to be. Those are the biggest drivers that will affect the amount of money that we have in FY24, or our variance between our expenditures and revenue there.
But this $30 million figure is what ASD is anticipating rolling over to FY25 and bringing the $95 million structural deficit down to 65.
Exactly, yeah.
And we have that savings because of the sheer volume of unfilled positions.
Yes, mostly. There's some other factors too. Then the next page actually put together a summary that will show what we've done, how our projections went over the last, since we started this. We used data from our original projections, was data from towards the end of November. So the variance column on the far right is what our current projection minus what our original projection was. So really wanted to show you kind of the broad categories of where we saw those savings kind of increase throughout the course of the year. When we do our original projection in November, December time frame, we're fairly conservative on what we're putting in there. A lot of it's either, worst case scenario, and some things happen throughout the year, but by and large, we're going to be conservative on those estimates, because when we're developing our budget and saying we have money in our savings to spend, we don't want to end the end of the year and say, well, about that money we had to spend, and now we don't have it. So fairly conservative, and you can see over time that it does grow. But the biggest things are interest earnings. That one was hard to project, as that really started towards the last half of the year as the Fed started increasing that rate. We really did start increasing the amount of interest earnings we had. So that's about 3.8 million. The state revenue, once they finalized our intensive needs counts, it jumped up by about a little over 3 million. And then we got a little bit more in impact aid and the emergency connectivity money than what we were originally expecting in November, December. So about $8.8 million in additional revenue since then. And for the expenditures, our salaries lowered by about 2.2 million. A lot of that was due to certificated staff. We got additional grants for nurses from the state, which paid for some of the duties they were doing. Essentially, it's the same people in the building, just a different funding source, as the state tries to spend out their remaining stimulus money as well. So that brought that down. Our accrued leave and usage also went down by a little bit. Our substitute costs continued to go up as we couldn't fill some of those positions we'd hoped to fill back in November. And then our paraprofessional and clericals went down as well, as we couldn't continue to fill those positions as we hoped. From the benefit side, about 2.6 million. Most of that was workers' comp. We didn't expend as much workers' comp as we had expected. We usually generally kind of worst case scenario that as well. But as we had fewer claims throughout the year, we didn't spend that money as we're self-insured for workers' comp. Unemployment's the same way, but we didn't have the total cost of that's not nearly as much, but it did go down. And then the fringe benefits associated with the drop in the overall salaries not being as much as we had expected. So that's why the salaries and benefits go down. Utilities, we don't know what the winter is going to be like when we're projecting in November. So we're fairly conservative when we do that. And so as we had a little bit warmer winter, but a lot more snow, our utilities were less than expected.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah, of course.
I did see a question in the room from the street.
Andy, the workers' comp, do you think that's because we're doing a better job not getting hurt, or because that's the loss of something?
I think it's probably a better job of not having significant injuries. Those can turn around pretty quick. If you get a couple of big claims, that's $1 million pretty quick. So the loss in staffing also is a loss in how much we accrue in our workers' comp fund to pay for it too. So as we have less staff, we have less money going in to pay the claims, but we also have fewer claims. So overall, we've had the last few years or several years, we've had a trend of lower claims than what we've accrued. For FY24, we have adjusted our workers' comp rates downward quite a bit, reduced the budget by $1.5 million or $2 million, I think, just because we've had this trend of accruing more into our workers' comp fund than we have expenses paid out. So we have addressed that. We'll see how it shakes out in FY24. But again, big claims and any big claims in any year is going to significantly sway how much money we have there.
Great.
Other services, unallocated money, that's the money that most of that's charter school money. Some of that went Aquarian, transferred it out to pay for some of their capital improvements. And then they just had some unanticipated costs or used more of it than what they had expected. The more indirect costs, the indirect cost is included in those other services as well. So that's, as we recovered more indirect costs from the grants, that changed that number. And then our instructional contracted services actually kind of offset that and increased. But I think a lot of that was more we had more contracts for vacant staff, particularly with related services. And then in correspondence, our correspondence schools, a lot of those started going through more of their reimbursements towards the end of the year, trying to spend that money out. So as that got spent out, that's where that comes out, where they're paying for class fees somewhere. So that's some of the, and that would also have an effect on the unallocated. If it's a correspondence charter school, it's pulling money out of their unallocated and putting it into their contracted services for instruction. There's a relationship there. Our supplies were different. Most of that's just unspent teaching and supplies and expendable equipment, and didn't seem to be indicative across. I mean, it was pretty well across all different schools, departments, elementary, secondary. It was across the board. There was quite a bit of unspent supply and equipment money that was left on the table this year. Then the last piece of it was the transfers to other funds. We had a decrease in our projected amount that we were going to put into the health insurance fund as we had some remaining ESSER money to cover that. And then there was a increase in the amount of food service with having to pay for the shelf-stable meals as well as some unpaid meal balances. So, and then our capital projects increased as we funded a DDC project that was originally going to be paid out of stimulus money, but then ended up due to the contracting issues with the federal government, we ended up paying for that out of the general fund instead. I believe that was like 1.6 million, and that was on a board memo sometime in the last fall. So overall, we added about 18 million into that pool since November. Plus the 12.5 million that we saved from the state one-time money. That's where you get to about that $30 million that we're going to carry forward. So as we're talking to folks and understand how that money, kind of important to understand how that money gets, those savings are achieved. Unfortunately, a lot of it's due to not having folks in our classrooms. So, are there any questions on our FY23 projections?
Sorry, I wanted to clarify. So the FY23 one-time funds that we carried forward, which is the $32 million figure here, that is not the variance plus savings from the FY24 one-time funds.
Well, we were able to reduce our reliance on our savings. So that's what brought it down to the 32.4 million versus the original 45 million.
Okay. Okay.
So it's kind of crossing fiscal years and how you look at the money, but at the end of the day, the 30 million is what we expect to have to be able to put towards FY25, all things being equal.
I see member Jacob's hand online.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Question for Mr. Ratliff. How much of the 18 million is one-time federal funds?
This is all just general fund at this point. We're still going through our one-time federal funds to see what we might have left over for from FY23. So we'll get that number to you guys once we close that out, and Katie might have an indication of when that might be, but this does not include the federal.
It does not.
But we'll get an update on unspent federal funds
Right.
sometime in the near future. Great.
Madam Chair, yes, I have a random question, connected but not really. I just want to make sure I answered a question I got recently correct. And the question had to do with funding for military child.
Federal impact aid.
Is that the impact aid? Okay.
Okay, great. We've got 10 or 12 minutes remaining. Maybe we can pivot to FY. We're going through 3 years. We are a time.
Hey.
We're going to do FY24 budget revisions. Any questions following Tuesday's work session?
I thought we had a good session.
I prepared for that meeting by writing down a lot of questions. But really a lot of them were answered over the course of that presentation, so I really appreciated. It was really comprehensive. I just want to share my general distaste for feeling like we need to backfill, knowing that we need to backfill the budget for student nutrition because we weren't able to staff things properly. And I was trying to understand the scope of that. And so I was looking back through our FY23 budget, and the best I could come up with was that we're paying frontline kitchen staff around $3.5 million across elementary and secondary. And now we're going to be throwing another $438,000 at it's a big proportion that hindsight is always 2020, had we invested that $438,000 into, I don't know how you would convert that to an hourly wage, but that might have, prevented kids from eating, what are they, number J, ASD MREs. And I don't want to be blasé, but I just, it's really unfortunate. And then when you think about, and there's revenue that ASD receives, a lot of revenue from those federal reimbursements. I mean, so I think it's a really I think we need to be very strategic in how and I know that staff is working very hard to replace challenging positions. But I guess if we need to throw money in that direction, I'd rather throw it in at the start of the year than at the end of the year.
Yeah.
I guess that's just my piece, I want to say.
I think we share that sentiment too,
Yeah.
It's not.
So it's,
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to take decisive action on paraprofessionals, for example.
right,
Because we would get in that position again, where if we don't invest on the front end, the back end, we have all this revenue. For student nutrition, that was another one that we acted with urgency, but not as early as.
I mean, I think investing on the front end of everything, starting with,
But I gotta tell you though, I mean, I would rather children have something to eat.
oh, yeah,
It may
something's
not
better
be
than
hot,
nothing.
it may not be warm, I would rather they eat. And so it is a quagmire, but I hear what you're saying and the expectation that our kids have a hot lunch every single day, every kid who wants a hot lunch, have a hot lunch. I mean, I would love to have that happen, but the reality is, I don't know where the staff is gonna come from to man all of our kitchen staff. So we're gonna have to be creative, and we're gonna have to push and keep fighting. So I don't disagree, it's just, it's crazy. Yeah,
We was starting this year in a better position than we did last year.
that's it.
Absolutely, I mean, rather than 19 vacancies, we're down to a handful. And so I think that speaks,
Yeah.
directly to a lot of important work that has taken place. So I look forward to not having this conversation in 12 more months.
We may have to.
Yeah. Oh, but okay, so we're gonna spend the next 6 or 7 minutes, maybe on FY 25. I mean, unless there are other board members with FY 24
Did you answer your
questions.
question about, you had another question, about the revisions? I'm just gonna assume that you got that question.
I think that a
You're
lot
good?
of my questions were answered.
Okay, all right, cool,
Um,
because it'll be on consent, if we not
Yeah, I know.
consent,
right.
pull it and
Right.
have another discussion, but.
So
yeah.
let's maybe pivot to next year, FY 25. You gave us a glimpse, or the team gave us a glimpse of 9 town halls and
That was actually last year's calendar.
that was
So,
last year's calendar.
yeah, so we just kind of wanted to show you how we finished out last year. The legislative session ended and, now we're trying to make the adjustments based on that past legislative session. So the 9 town halls, those were for the school closures mostly, so.
Okay.
I don't think we have a set plan of what we're gonna do for the FY 25 budget development. But hopefully it's not 9 town halls of school closures.
Right,
So I guess I
And I should have been more clear when I went back and looked at the slide. It didn't have a year on it. So
yeah, I don't know that we'll need 9, but, I mean,
We'll
we have
we'll
to,
definitely
but
have
we
some.
also, keep in mind though, we will be doing our goals and guardrails as well. That's a whole nother set of public meetings.
okay.
So as far as the budget development timeline goes, however the board wants to work that, last year we went through about every 2 weeks giving you a new piece of bad news. that
Right.
Potentially cut. It was, it really took the focus off of academics, frankly.
Right,
So if we wanted to just wait till kind of later in the budget development, later in September, October, here's kind of a refresher we went through, because nothing's really changed that much
Yeah.
from the previous, several sessions that we went through. And the board hasn't changed either, so same makeup of the board, same ideas we have, areas we can cut from. It might just be that we do a refresher and then start doing our town halls or community meetings, whatever, however we want to do it this year.
So you do anticipate having community
We always have some community engagement,
Conversations.
yeah.
over the course of the fall?
Yeah, because we have to start developing our budget December, January. So typically we have those surveys go out October, November.
So you anticipate soliciting public input on sort of financial priorities or choices?
Yeah, I would assume we do that again. We've done that every year.
Okay,
And as we align towards what's going to change, depending on what that change is.
Right.
okay.
Right, last year we were talking about specific programs, for example,
Right.
so if that's happening, we need to engage in a specific program or whatever it is. We haven't provided that kind of report as to what we're recommending to change, so we're structuring this.
I see, yeah, member Jacobs has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just an observation and then perspective, which administration can consider. Having attended the school start time town halls, I think that might be a potential model for how we interact and engage and solicit community input. I think where we had kind of regional town halls that worked fairly well, and I don't think I had a single complaint about there being inadequate access because they were all streamed online. So I wanted to add that feedback to the conversation. The other thing, and as we talk about kind of the content and the style, last year we talked about, and I think Mr. Anderson said in jest, you can't develop 2 budget booklets. I feel like as we develop the content for these town halls, there does need to be an element of the fact that there's so much uncertainty and discussing the various forks in the road that we've touched on in our work sessions, and being transparent with the public in that, if status quo changes, this is our reality. If there's within the first few days of session, reversal of the partial funding, the partial veto of one-time funding, this is our reality. If our preferred increase to the BSA and inflation proofing happens, this is our reality. And really driving home how funding impacts what happens in buildings. To me, there's value in that. If I were a parent, that's what I would want to know and understand coming away from these town halls, not just what the reality looks like, but how that could change based on actions of the legislature. Just putting that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, member Jacobs. I wanted to underscore that I think what you said is really important and link it to what I heard Senator Tobin share when I was a fly on the wall at the AASD summer board meeting. I was just an invited guest. It would be helpful to understand what the district would look like with an additional $1,348 per student. And, I'm thinking back to my 9th grade literature class. I'd like to know what the best of times look like. I'd like to know what the worst of times look like. Given, what we have to base our future predictions on, then it would be nice to know what that alternative pathway could entail. Because ultimately, $65 million is 650 positions. And I don't know how you cut 650 positions other than increasing pupil to teacher ratios by probably 12. That's my ballpark based on what you guys have shared previously. And that to me just blows my mind as a board member, as a parent, as a community member. So, I wouldn't like losing 650 jobs if I was a realtor, if I was a banker, if I was in a whole lot of other professions across Anchorage. So I think that this needs to be part of the conversation. I guess I would like to hear more about what we could do and what that future would look like with a robust procurement of additional funding based on
And I know we're,
right time, yeah.
real quick, just a heads up, more or less, because it's not anything that any business that we can do today, but just be aware that there is a push, and I think I looped in Kelly, Andy's looped in, Carl's looped in. There is a push to create a ballot initiative around class size. That blows my mind, but there are well-meaning people wanting to do some things that might not be the best for us. As meaning ASD or Alaska, in my opinion. But that conversation is being had out there. And so we just need to pay attention. I was just looking haphazardly a couple of days ago, and then, we did get an email from ASD, and I'm gonna send that, I'll share it with the administration. But that's out there, and people are trying to help. We just gotta be part of the conversation on what is helpful. So that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn and.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
Thank you. Our next meeting will be, in a month, September